In today's episode, we're going to look at what you can do when your child makes an error while requesting, including when that request is in the form of challenging behavior. But before we kick it off, let's do a quick recap. Last time, we looked at one of the main reasons why we communicate, which is to request. The basic three parts of a request are want it, say it, and get it. Now, for all intents and purposes, when I use the word say, that's going to encompass all forms. So signs, gestures, selection, writing, typing. It's not just vocal. Again, a request essentially is want it, say it, and get it. Now, of course, we don't get everything that we ask for, but there's a much higher chance of that happening when the request comes under the right conditions, when it's socially accepted, and it can be understood. So before we get into discussing errors, remember that the best response to an error actually comes before that error is even made. All right, so if you know your child wants something and you also know they don't know how to yet request it, or you can anticipate that they might not ask for it correctly or appropriately, just give it to them without requiring any specific response right now. The only form of responding that you ideally wouldn't want to accept would be any kind of problem behavior. So if your child wants something, they don't yet know how to communicate for that specific motivation, they're going to be more likely to default to some other response that has worked in the past. And that response is usually the one that's like easiest, most reliable. So the way to prevent them from doing this is just to make responding unnecessary at first. So technically, they're still doing something, right? Even if they're just sitting there, they're sitting. You just want to make sure whatever that they are doing at the time is something that you want them to be doing so that you don't inadvertently increase an undesired response. All right, so this is an important point. Whenever you give your child anything, just say what you're giving, right? So every time you do this, you are modeling what they can say to get it. So you see here in this image, there's some broken up pieces of a cookie. And by giving small amounts of something at a time, it's a great way to just get in lots of practice opportunities. If they can't yet ask for it, they're going to benefit from lots of models and repetition, right? So if I only have one cookie and I give them the whole thing, I can't model it anymore. I only get one opportunity out of it. But if I break that into little pieces, I now have many more opportunities to model. I may even get some responding from them, right? And then I can give them bigger pieces anytime that a more desired response occurs. All right, so I say model, and that is going to include a vocal model, but if your child is using any kind of AAC, you ideally want to model their response form as well. So again, the best response to an error comes before the error is made. So if you're actively working on teaching your child to request something, you can prevent an error by providing a prompt before they have a chance to do anything else. So in this case, a specific response is necessary, but you're making it a little easier to use that response by temporarily giving them some added support, right? And a prompt, excuse me, serves two purposes. It lessens the chance of that incorrect response happening, and two, it's going to evoke that correct response. So if your child can echo the word cookie, for example, then you would hold it up, you would say cookie, and then you would have them repeat you. All right, so remember, if you give a prompt, you'll want to try to get rid of that as soon as possible. So the other benefit of giving a small piece, right, they're still going to want more of it. So you can hold it up again, and this time you can try to see if they'll ask you without a prompt or with less prompting, right? And if they ask for the cookie without or with less assistance, then you can give them a whole lot more of it, right? A bigger piece gets for that independent response. The more independent that response, the more effortful, and it should contact a bigger reward. Right? So prompts, they often get a bad reputation, right? You might think that giving your child a prompt to help them respond hinders their independence. Actually, prompts simply reduce errors in the learning process. So as long as you are systematically using and then trying to fade out the prompts, your child will likely reach mastery even faster. It's going to be less frustrating for them to learn the skill, and they're going to be more likely to stay motivated and not have to use any kind of challenging behavior. If you ever learned to do something incorrectly, by the time that you realized that you were making mistakes, right, that error became so ingrained that it became that much harder to go back and relearn how to do it correctly and really make a conscious effort to not keep making that same mistake. It was that much harder to do it the second time, I'm sure. So prevention, again, is that best protection. All right, well, we do want to minimize errors. They still do happen. And here's what an error may look like. So first, they might be asking for something that doesn't match what they really want, right? So has this ever happened to you? Your child asks for something, you give it to them, and then they indicate somehow that, that wasn't really what they wanted. So a basic example here, let's say they want a cookie, but they say apple. All right, the listener is most likely going to deliver an apple, right? Because we can't read minds. We can only read what a person does, their behavior. The request isn't going to be very effective if it doesn't lead you to what you want. So in their attempt to communicate, if their attempt to communicate doesn't work, then this is where you might see some challenging behavior, right? Because the motivation is not going to go away just because your request didn't work. And in many cases, the motivation becomes even stronger. So if we don't actively teach effective forms of requesting at the right times when there's motivation, the person is at an increased risk for developing some challenging behavior to get those wants and needs met by others. All right, so when error occurs, it's too late to prevent that error, but it's not too late to try to correct the error and to try to prevent additional errors in the future, right? So to correct the error, we're almost going to address this in the same way that we used to teach requests in the first place, but there's just going to be an added step. All right, so they want a cookie, but they said apple. The first thing that we're going to do here is pause. So ideally, I also want to try to remove the presence of what they're trying to ask for and also remove any kind of signal signal of attention, such as direct eye contact and talking. All right, because this is going to show them that that response didn't work to get my attention, and ultimately what you wanted. And showing is much more powerful than telling. So I'm going to then try to silently count for a few seconds. Now, generally, it's about 3 to 10 seconds, depending upon the learner and the situation, right? It's not that big of a deal. I might just pause for 3 seconds and then go for the next step, right? Now, the purpose of the pause is that it puts some time in between the error and the next step, which is going to lead them to getting what they want. After the pause, the next step is you're immediately going to prompt a response that will be effective. So if you prompted without the pause, you're more likely to continue getting that error in the future, or what ends up happening a lot of times is they just add a response to the error. So for the example, your child might say apple cookie, excuse me, instead of just cookie. So again, that pause signals, nope, that's not how you get it. And that prompt says, here's how you get it. All right, so it can be a little tricky because in order to prompt the response, you have to know what to prompt, and you don't always know what they want. You don't always know part A because you can't observe motivation, you can only observe behavior. All right, so we're going to play a little game. I'm going to give you some clues about a request, and I'm going to see if you can figure out the meaning of that request. So the first clue, I have a 2-year-old daughter and she's just learning to communicate. So she's making frequent errors, okay? The error the one day was she said poof fairy. And it sounded like possibly it could be tooth fairy, but if you don't know what that meant, neither did I. All right, so to figure this out, I had to look for some additional clues. All right, so clue number 2. Right before she said tooth fairy, we walked into the bathroom. Again, if you can't figure out the meaning of your child's behavior, why they're doing what they're doing, your best clue is going to come by looking at what happened immediately before they did it. All right, there could be a lot of things that happened, but the most relevant one is going to be what occurred immediately before. So what changed? Well, we walked into the bathroom. All right, clue number 3. You can observe body language for possible clues. All right, so she was looking around and she was looking at, excuse me, and reaching for her toothbrush. Those are both common approach behaviors that tell me that something is probably valuable at the moment, as opposed to our body language, what it might look like when we're trying to get rid of something or we're trying to escape or avoid it. All right, now clue number 4. The past can help you predict or can help you figure out the present. So I know my daughter likes brushing her teeth. It's a very enjoyable routine, and the response tooth fairy, it kind of resembles toothbrush. Let me see. So from those clues, we could guess that, maybe she wants to brush her teeth. That's the closest thing I can think of. All right, let's see if we solve the mystery. The best way to know for sure is to observe your child's response right after. So if she is pushing the toothbrush away, then nope, that's not it. I have to keep looking for more clues. But if she smiles, which she did, and she's reaching and she's doing some other indicators that, yeah, that's probably what she wanted, then here's what I can do. I can use this as a kind of teachable moment. I'm going to remove the toothbrush and I'm going to pause for just a couple seconds. And then I'm going to represent it with a prompt. And my prompt is going to be toothbrush, or at the very least, I can just model it, right? Might not have to get her to say it, but I'm going to model it still. All right, so I say, toothbrush, yeah, let's brush your teeth, right? And I prompted toothbrush, and after that, she said, who shush? So I'm not going to consider that an error right now, right? It's developmentally appropriate and it's clear enough to be functional for the time being, right? But it's only going to be for the time being. And the way that I'm going to eventually get a better response is when I prompt it and I model it, I'm always going to say what it should sound like, right? If I say poo shush, then it's always going to stay poo shush and it's never going to become anything else. All right, another type of response that you probably will want to treat as an error is going to be when your child is emitting multiple responses. So this can occur across really any response form, but here's what it might look like. For example, if your child is signing apple and they're vocally saying cookie, so one of those response forms might match the motivation, but I don't know which one, right? Because one of them doesn't. It could also look like the learner, if they're using a device, let's say they wanted a drink and they press soda, grape juice, milk, grape juice, tea, soda, right? It's going to be really hard for a listener to interpret the intent of that request and to respond appropriately. You can't really rule out that they're just scrolling through every option until they find one that works. So again, to ensure that that doesn't happen, you could treat that as an error. It's like taking a multiple choice test, right? If I circled more than one option, even if I circled the right one, it's really not clear that I know which one it is. If you have your child practicing asking for something, like say they're asking for the cookie, but they say banana, chips, cookie, and let's say that that led them to the cookie, right? Then what they might learn is that, their response really doesn't matter. It doesn't matter which response I use. Right? Another possible example is repetition of the same response. So the learner might emit the same response in a repetitive way. Cookie, cookie, cookie. And this might technically, again, be the correct response. But if I honor this instead of correcting it early on, that repetitive behavior can be really difficult to address and try to correct later. Right? So similarly, if they're screaming, cookie, right? It no longer matters that they used the correct word. If I honor that request while they're doing something undesired, I'm strengthening everything that's happening at the moment, not just what they're saying, but how they're saying it. And they're going to be more likely to scream everything that they want. So always consider what's going to be socially accepted and effective in the long run. It's better to give lots of models early on. Now, if your child is just exploring their device and they're not really attempting to communicate, then you're probably not going to want to then you're not going to respond as if it were a request. And you're also not going to treat this as an error either. So this is actually really good because they're learning where things are, they're hearing the words. So it's certainly not something I'm going to want to discourage. I just want to be mindful that requesting isn't all about the request itself, but that it comes under the right conditions. All right, so when there's no request, it's not necessarily an error. So if I'm not really trying to gain or remove anything, there's no reason to request. The motivation's not there. It's also not an error if there's no need to interact with another person. Let's say I'm watching TV, I want to change the channel. I'm not going to request the remote if it's right there next to me, right? We have to be really careful not to require too many requests because then I don't really teach the person to attend to the circumstances of when they should make the request. That situation's a little bit different if I'm in the middle of watching a show with my husband and I'm not going to just change the channel without asking. Or if he's holding the remote, I'm not going to go and rip it out of his hands, right? A request would be necessary in those situations. Now, sometimes it's all about, again, the circumstances, right? Because at home, you might be able to get a drink without asking. But if you're in a classroom, you can't just run out of the door and go to the water fountain without asking. If I'm writing and I broke my pencil, I'm either going to, and I need to be able to advocate for myself to either get a new pencil or sharpen the one I have. I can't just sit there and not say anything at all. So that's why it's important to teach requesting in different circumstances. But make sure that the request always leads to improving conditions. So by that, I mean, for example, if I'm trying to toilet train my child, I'm going to focus on toilet training first. I'm not going to try to make them request to go to the bathroom. If they don't yet value going to the bathroom, I might actually be punishing requesting. All right, the next type of error is not, again, always an error. It's going to depend upon the circumstances. So it's when motivation is there and some sort of response occurs to act on that motivation, but that response isn't a request. So no request is made when a request would be expected. Right? This often looks like the learner attempts to get something on their own. Right? And as you can see in this picture, you have a child climbing on the kitchen counter. I'm going to assume they're trying to get a snack. They could just be curious and trying to look what's in the cabinets, trying to explore. But either way, I'm going to say they failed to make some sort of request here. I wouldn't assume that somebody would allow their child just to climb up on counters. So here's how I can respond to this type of error. Now, first, this is a very important step. I want to stop the incorrect response. So in this case, I'm going to want to guide the child back down to the floor. Then comes that pause for about the 3 to 10 seconds. And then I'm going to prompt, right? So it's not just about teaching your child what request they should make, but when and where they should make that request. If you prompt while they're still doing the incorrect response, so for example, they're still on the counter, then they might learn that climbing on the counter is part of how I get it. Right? Without the pause, even if they were back down on the floor, they might learn that, okay, getting down is what leads me to getting it. So they're going to have to get up in order to get down. So something else worth noting is that you might want to say something like feet on the floor as opposed to get down if your child is climbing, because if they hear get down and then again that follows by getting what they want, in order to do that, I had to get up, right? So I'm going to make that response irrelevant. So you can do it by having your feet on the floor, right? How I respond can make a big difference in what my child does. All right, so a quick review before we move on. Preventing and ultimately teaching are key, but if an error happens, just pause and try again with a prompt, or at the very least, model that response you want your child to do. And then anytime that you are kind of going back and think like basically reteaching it, you want to find additional opportunities to teach that right response the first time, right? So get ahead of it a little bit. A sign that you can stop teaching any skill is when your child can perform it without any assistance and they do it accurately, quickly, and consistently across time, and they do it in different situations where they're going to need to use it. All right, so now let's shift into talking about challenging behavior. But it's really actually what we've been talking about this whole time. Because when a request is in the form of challenging behavior, it's essentially an error. The person's really responding the best way that they know how in that situation, because they haven't learned many alternative ways to respond that are more socially accepted and easier for others to understand. At the end of the day, right, they're doing what works, at least sometimes. So one of the things that can make challenging behavior so challenging is that what the person does, doesn't tell you why they are doing it. So we have to examine the context in which it occurs. So what happened right before the person does it? What exactly are they doing? And what does that behavior produce? Right? Does it gain something wanted or does it remove something unwanted? Sometimes the same behavior can serve multiple purposes. So it works to get something and it also works to get rid of something. And if challenging behavior weren't challenging enough, the person might do multiple things that others find challenging, and they do these things under a variety of circumstances. All right, so just like that game we played to determine what poof fairy might have meant, we're going to examine the clues around what a person does to help us figure out why they might be doing the challenging behavior. All right, the more accurate we are in identifying clues, the more we equip ourselves to do something about it. So we always want to start with the observable, right? So if your child tantrums, what exactly does that look like and sound like? Remember, if you were writing this down and a stranger was going to be watching your child for a week, you would want to make sure that they can accurately count every instance of the behavior. All right, so now take one of the behaviors you defined and let's look at part A. The most important part is the what. What happened immediately before? The what is what caused it. But the who, when, and where, they can also be relevant factors, right? The only thing that we can't gather by looking at all three parts is the why. All right, so now let's figure out what reliably happens after your child does it. This can be tricky because there might be a lot of things happening, right? And sometimes we're so focused on the challenging behavior that it's hard to be aware of everything else. So here are the main questions that'll provide some clues. How are people reacting? Is your child gaining or maintaining something? Does something unpleasant go away, even temporarily? And how does your child respond when those things happen? If it stops or lessens the challenging behavior at the moment, the challenging behavior was effective and they're going to be more likely to do it in the future whenever they're faced with those same or similar circumstances to part A. All right, also remember that not everything that a person does is for the purpose of communicating to others, but all behaviors that serve the purpose of communicating, they have one thing in common, which is another person's attention. A commonly misidentified reason for challenging behavior is that they do it for attention. So I'm not saying that this isn't the case because caregiver attention tends to be super valuable, right? And there's a lot of times where we do things because all we want is attention. Just be mindful that there could be other reasons, right? I think back to when my kids were infants and they would cry sometimes, and I would go over and pick them up and hold them and interact with them. And sometimes that's all they wanted, so they stopped crying. But other times they'd still be crying even after I picked them up. And it was only after I changed their diaper or fed them that they'd stop, because that was really what they wanted. So if your child often does the challenging behavior to gain your attention, one strategy is to simply shift your attention to behavior you want to see your child doing, right? Make it so that challenging behavior is unnecessary, right? Think about it. When is the last time you gave your child attention? You gave your attention to something you wanted your child to be doing. How many times do we say, I like the way you're sitting so quietly. You have your hands to yourself. Great job, right? But misbehavior tends to be much more reliable in gaining attention, right? Stop hitting. No yelling. Misbehavior produces attention on nearly a 1-to-1 ratio. So flip that around. Try to give high quality attention freely and frequently, right? If challenging behavior occurs, just minimize your attention while redirecting them to what you want them to be doing. If you know you're going to have to remove your attention for a period of time to attend to other responsibilities, then give lots of attention and meet other basic needs beforehand. And then also make sure that your child is, has some fun activity to keep themselves engaged. And you can do periodic checks and reward when you catch your child being good, right? Then they won't have to crave attention. Another reason for challenging behavior, why it might occur, is to gain something more tangible, like food or drink, an activity, or an item. If you suspect this is the reason for behavior, here are some of the things you can do. All right, I'd start by just making the challenging behavior unnecessary. If you know they might want something and those circumstances usually lead to challenging behavior, then give it to them before they have a chance to use the challenging behavior. And make the reward better than they would usually get for challenging behavior. because you don't want to give them any reason to have to use the challenging behavior. And now, if you start to observe any warning signs that they might do the challenging behavior, you might need to respond to this in order to prevent more challenging behavior, right? A lot of times we miss these early warning signs, such as whining or whimpering, and we put ourselves in a position where we have to respond to more serious behavior, right? After a while, your child might even stop doing these early warning signs because they're not even working, right? I'm just going to go full-blown challenging behavior without any warning because that's what works. Now, eventually, you can treat these warning signs as an error, but initially, do what you can to prevent the challenging behavior. If your child does use the challenging behavior or any other undesired response, treat it just like you would an error, right? It's a teachable moment. The first step is a critical one here, though. Now, really more than ever, is the time you want to disconnect what they're doing from gaining something or removing something that they don't want. All right. So you want to try to remove the presence of what they want. But again, safety is key. So you might need to respond in, you might have to respond in a less than ideal way in a less than ideal circumstance. You want to try to minimize attention. So that means, as hard as it is, right? Try not to be overly calming or soothing. Now, on the other end, you want to try to remain calm yourself, right? So becoming escalated yourself only makes that situation worse. When I'm in this situation, I try to focus on the procedures, right? So I increase my awareness to the present moment so I can be more effective in my response. And I can also gain valuable insight that's going to help me to prevent this in the future. So again, focus on the procedures is something that's helped me. When you get back, when you get a break in the challenging behavior, you're going to start that silent count. So the longer the pause, the more you're really disconnecting the challenging behavior from leading to what is wanted. But you might not be able to reach 10 seconds before that behavior restarts, right? So if you can even pause for a few seconds, that's better than nothing. If the behavior has stopped for the entire 10-second pause, you're going to prompt a response that will be effective. If your child can't yet respond with a prompt, then here's where you're just going to model that response, right? You're going to show them what they can do instead of having to do the challenging behavior, and then you're going to try to teach them to use that. Another important part is to make sure that you're not giving them a whole lot of whatever they're getting after challenging behavior, right? So give a lot less quality and quantity so they really don't have a reason to use the challenging behavior, right? I have much more of a reason to use the replacement response. If your child uses that challenging behavior, you'll want to increase opportunities to teach that request appropriately. So turn that into a prevention strategy and get ahead of it. All right, so we talked about what to do when your child wants to gain access to something, but when your child presents that unwanted behavior in situations where they're really trying to remove something they don't want, the only difference in how you're going to respond is that you actually want to wait to remove that until the challenging behavior is stopped, right? Because if you remove it while the challenging behavior is occurring or even immediately after, it's going to show them that behavior is effective to get rid of it. So try to wait for that behavior to stop and then pause before taking it away. Right? If you reach the whole interval, then you can either model a way that they can get rid of it. No, you don't have to eat that right now. And then you take it away. Or prompt some alternative way they can get rid of it. So that might even be prompting a request for what they'd rather have instead. right? So a lot of times kids will throw toys, even though they love their toys, right? But they don't want it anymore. They're done playing with it and they don't know how to say that. So you might just look at, all right, well, they did that. Now I'm going to represent it. And then I'm going to say, you don't have to play Legos anymore. I want to draw. You want to draw. All right, try not to give too much attention to problem behavior because your child might learn that doing the behavior is what gets other people to respond in that certain way, and that could actually be making things better for them. So, overcorrection. So, our attempt to try to say things like making them pick up what they just threw. That actually might seem like a logical consequence, but it might not be that first thing that you actually want to do, right? Because it's not as effective as it might appear. Our understanding of and regard for rules is much, much lower when our emotions are high, right? So getting your child back to any successful responding that isn't related to the challenging behavior, and then teaching when you respond like this, good stuff happens is generally the way to go. All right, if you're out in the community though, and your child is doing this challenging behavior, to try to tell you that they want to leave, right? You might not be able to wait for the behavior to stop before removing them from that setting, right? Again, it's ideal if you can, but it's not a deal breaker if you can't. Just try to not make it so obvious that that's the reason you're leaving, right? I wouldn't say, "Are you telling me you want to go?" Like, all right, we'll stop. We'll go if you stop, right? So again, it makes it contingent upon their behavior, and you want that really to not have anything to do with it in their eyes. Think about what you can do differently next time if this has to happen, right? So maybe the outing, I make it shorter to begin with. I bring lots of things to keep them engaged. It all goes back to prevention. Right, what happens if you try to pause and do the silent count, but they go back to doing the challenging behavior? Well, you're going to wait it out. It's and restart your count, excuse me. You may shorten that pause and so you can make it more reachable. If you try to do this, but it's after 3 attempts or they're still doing the challenging behavior, there's really no break in the behavior. Go back. You might redirect to something neutral and something slightly of value, or try to get your child doing anything else. Excuse me. Take a drink here. All right, those fidget poppers, for example, they're not really something that my son will seek out. So they're not super valuable to him. But if I put one in front of him, he would reliably push the little button, right? Regardless if I gave him the direction or not. There's a little bit of a distraction here because now they might be focused on a task rather than continuing to think about what was making them upset, right? So when you get your child to start responding more favorably, then you can reward with a small amount of attention, right? That's the way you do it. Or some other small low value reward. Right? At the end of the day, though, safety is the #1 consideration. You have to put everyone else's safety and well-being before teaching. Remember, challenging behavior, it takes a lot out of us, and it takes a lot out of your child as well. So if you're feeling physically and mentally drained after challenging behavior, your child probably is too, right? Stop, get a drink of water, let's everybody reset. Practice self-care regularly, but especially after enduring a lot of stress like this, right? That stress is going to compound. And every single time that you endure that, if you don't manage that properly, then it's just going to make it worse and worse over time. So you can't take care of others if you don't take care of yourself. All right, so I'm going to end this episode by providing some helpful tips. First, try to honor appropriate requests as much as possible. Of course, there's going to be times where you can't, and we'll talk about that in an upcoming episode. But remember, the more often that an appropriate request works, the more they'll make appropriate requests instead of having to use challenging behavior. If appropriate requests only work 1 out of 10 times, but challenging behavior works 10 out of 10 times, guess which one they're going to be more likely to use? All right, so make it easy to request appropriately by providing prompts during the learning process and pick requests that aren't too difficult to produce. Increase that difficulty in small steps so there really isn't a noticeable jump in response effort. And make appropriate requests work quicker and produce better results than the challenging behavior does. Always model what you want to see. Intimidating your child's behavior isn't going to teach them not to do it or what to do instead. If your child sees you overreact to situations, then that's how they're going to learn to react to situations as well. Right? A caregiver is likely going to be a child's first and best teacher. So let that empower you to always give the best you have. Do what you can with what you have with where you are now. All right, so that's it for today's episode. But if you are wondering, what do I do when challenging behavior occurs, whenever I interrupt the preferred activity, or I have to get my child to give up something, when they have to wait, or when I tell them no, they can't have what they want? If you're wondering that, be sure to subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell so you won't miss the next 3 episodes. In the meantime, check out the resource collection that's pinned in the comments, and you're going to find all the resources from this series and more. All right, and if no one told you lately, you're doing awesome. It's not easy, but it's certainly worth it. You got this.